So please very warmly welcome our panel, Communicating Retrofit.
Thank you, John. So I'm Charlotte. I come from a communications background in finance and property, and also I've been a comic artist for academic essays, turn them into graphic essays. And I've been in the transitions work at CIVIC Square, like the transitions work, for a year now. So I'm here to learn, because you guys have been 12 years, like 4 years in extinction. So I'm very much here to learn on this panel and from the room as well. From being at CIVIC Square, you know, when I thought retrofit, I always thought solar panels and installation. But from working with John, I've learned that it's not about installation, it's all about streets, and it's all about retrofitting our hearts and our minds. And when I joined the transitions team, one of the first things that they'd been doing for the past couple of years is being on the street, having conversations with people on Link Road about retrofit, just a cup of coffee, some cake, having conversations. And from there, when I was having conversations with them, there was this general feeling of they know things are complex and bad, and they want warm homes and safe homes. And some, you got mixed people. Some people are feeling a way about it, quite negative. And some people are feeling quite optimistic when they see that other people are getting involved. And so within this complexity, one of the things I found that's really working in the storytelling vein is focusing on the things that are happening. So we started a newspaper that doesn't focus on the so much so on what we already know is bad, but on the good news. So the good news of B16, it was the future is already here. It was the first newspaper that we did, and it spotlighted the people and the projects that are providing proof of possibility, and also opportunities that are on our doorstep. So very much neighborhood-based, but also beyond, because it's all interconnected. Next slide, if that's okay. So we went around interviewing people using this, what we call the Discovery Canvas. And one of those people was John Christophers, actually, and Retrofit Balsall Heath was one of the people who featured in that newspaper. And next slide. So this is what it looked like. It was a weekly issue, and if you can imagine getting a weekly issue like this with a hand-drawn illustration. I'm a comic artist, so it always had ink illustrations through your door every week about the people that you see and what they're doing and what's happening on your road. So it was the good news of Link Road, and then this evolved. If you'd like to, so this is the cart. This is the Future's Already Here cart where we were situated, and next to the cart, if you go back one, sorry, getting over ego. You can see that there's one of the dream-funded projects of them. So it's a soil maker held by the community soil maker, and people can take the paper and turn it into compost. And so the good news of V16 looks like of Link Road this time. Go. What it also meant was that we could create avatars of different people. So instead of, because these are their homes, right? These are people's homes and their lives, and then the numbers on their doors. So it was provided an opportunity to introduce, these are the ambassador households on the street. So they're the ones that connect with everyone else on their street. And we had an offer for people to engage with the newspaper as well. Next slide. And then we evolved into We Love Link Road, based on, that was one of our designers who came up with the idea of being, like We Love New York, so We Love Link Road, or We Love Composting, or We Love Bat Boxes. It's an interchangeable design. Next one. And these are the different issues, and you can see the issues on the table over there as well if you want to have a little. They're safe to distribute versions. And we also had what was going on in the neighborhood at the back as advertisements. That's it. And so that was the weekly newsletter that we have, which is now going to evolve beyond the street into B16 and beyond. And we also, John Christophers invited me to host some interviews of families in Balsall Heath. So another thing that I've been involved in is a little bit of filming. And the focus was very much, these people have had retrofit done to their homes in different at different scales, and the focus was very much on them as people, their hopes, their fears in the work, what their experiences were. So that's another opportunity to tell stories. So that's a bit about what I've been up to, and now I'm going to pass on to the panel. We're going to have these introductions to our work, and then we're just going to have an open discussion on the opportunities when it comes to storytelling and some of the challenges. So over to Bobby's first.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Civic Square, for having me. Thank you all for being here. Just going to enjoy this sofa, by the way. I think this is the comfiest I'll ever be on any panel. But this, great. Thanks. Brilliant. It's great to have your perspective here, because that's such a creative way to communicate these issues. And as a PR, your job really isn't to do that sometimes. My job, I now work freelance and have done for like 7-8 years now, but I've been working in the architecture industry and for about 12 years. And a lot of that job ranges from like speaking for people or disseminating information for others. So I represent universities, cultural institutions, galleries, architects, designers, and my job is essentially disseminating that information and reaching out to journalists who might be interested in that story, who might not know about them, and presenting it in the best way possible. It's a lot of emails and kind of like honing messaging or giving people a bit of help where I can. Thing is, like, the perception of PRs is very like colored by politics. You know, you've got your Malcolm Tuckers, who you might have recognized from the thick of it, or, you know, for Sex and the City fans, Samantha Jones would be an icon for you. But like a lot of the times, it's mainly just people coming to you and you helping them with messaging and clarity and making sure they're speaking to the right people. So it really can be quite idiosyncratic in the same way that kind of retrofit can be. It's like you're really tailoring your message all the time. And, you know, for the first few years of my career, I was working for bigger agencies, or I was working for people who would kind of give me money, I would say. And I think that's kind of something where I was promoting architecture and design kind of for the sake of it. And like, obviously, given how bad things are with the climate emergency, I've kind of shifted my work now, where I'm mainly just focused on promoting sustainable architecture, and retrofit is really key for that, because, and we can kind of get into this later, this is just an introduction, I wanted to talk here, but yeah, like I think there's a cultural shift going on, hopefully within architecture, construction, and community groups now, where, you know, they're not looking for that star architect to build a pinnacle, you know, some glassy box in the middle of the city centre. They're looking for their homes to be saved. They're looking for their bills to go down, and they're looking for that community outreach there. And I like to think that my work, say with Architects Climate Action Network, which I've done most recently, or even in Glasgow, where I'm from, too, supporting groups like the Wynford Residents Union, who are they're a community group who are getting kicked out and evicted from their perfectly fine modernist flats that could be retrofitted. And I think that's where I'd like to bring some of this communications work to it. So yeah, that's just my introduction there, Charlotte.
Hello, I'm Josh.
Oh, is it? Sorry. Oh, is it John next? Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, here you go.
Shall I use this one? Yeah. Do you have a clicker, or shall I just do that one? Yeah, I'll just click my fingers, because there's quite a few. Hello, everyone. I'm Jewell. I might stand up, actually, so I can see the slides as well. And I've come from East Anglia and Suffolk today to come and talk about rural regeneration and what we're doing in East Anglia over the other side of the country. And I'm delighted to see such a packed audience and such a brilliant venue here. So similar to other people on the panel, I've spent 25 years in the private sector telling the wrong stories for the wrong people for the wrong reasons, very successfully as a managing director of a company and a director of a PLC. But that's equipped me with a set of skills and language that about 7 years ago, when I stepped off that corporate treadmill, I really gave some thought about what am I going to do? So I went into work in the third sector for a think tank called Shared Assets, whose focus was on common good land use with shared benefits. And then me and my friends, who often work at festival crews, creating amazing transient environments to be enjoyed for a few days and then torn down. We sat around a campfire and just kind of dreamed about, what if we applied our productive activity to something permanent? What would that look like? What would it feel like? And we decided to do it, and we set up a community benefit society, and we actually incorporated in February 2020. 1 month before lockdown. So we spent the first 18 months online. So we've only been going about 18 months, but we're moving at pace. And so this is going to be 5 or 8 minutes really quick storytelling. So we bought 10 acres of land, which is called iFarm in Norfolk. And that's an aerial shot of the land. We've got the trees that you can perhaps see on the left. That's 4 acres of woody carr, so that's fen. So that's for protection and conservation, and we're using the other amenity land for community food growing, market gardening, and a space to gather. And that's Dave, who's also our barman at our local pub. And first thing we did was had to clear tons and tons of rubbish and plastic off the land to restore the land. And then we created some rigs for market gardening, growing nutrient-dense organic food that we give away our surplus to the community. We give it away at the pub at the moment, and we supply food banks and a place called Still Good Food, which is a charity in our local town. Because food banks often get non-perishable goods, packets and tins. They rarely get fresh vegetables. And this is our pub. And we'd finished digging on the land, and I was really thirsty and wanted a pint. And I went round and it was shut. And I was like, I'm not going to have that. And it had been shut for 2 years during the pandemic, and then a year thereafter because no one wanted to take on a pub. And so I turned to the 4 people in the car and I said, should we buy it? And they went, okay. So we did. And it wasn't quite that simple because it took us a 7,500 word asset of community value nomination and all of the appendices to stop it being turned into a house, 48 objections from the local community that we rallied around, and after 13 months of negotiation we got the keys, and we're now brewing our own beer and drinking, dancing and cavorting. And the pub it's more than a pub. We have meet-up Mondays there on a Monday morning, and I have my surrogate grandparents that I come down to, and they all want to hear the news, and they give me big hugs, and it's lovely. So we're combating social isolation and loneliness. And what's really relevant here is retrofitting, because it's a leaky 200-year-old building, and it's community run, and so it's the community's money that's going up into the air. With the cheapest energy is no energy. So how are we going to insulate the 200-year-old leaky building, and how are we going to generate our own electricity? And as you can see, we're going to cover it in solar, or as Dave would say, he was the guy hiding behind the mushrooms, cover it in green science. So that's the White Horse, which is our community pub. And what we've done as a community benefit society is we decided we're going to do some community climate action planning. So we approached our local parish council and said, we'd like to write a community climate action plan. Could we have your support, please? And the first thing, we held a series of participatory workshops. So stakeholder mapping, who's around us, so the classic post-it note exercise, kept it up in the pub over the weekend, people added to it, said, oh, you've forgotten these people. And then we mapped it out, what does our community look like, and who do we need to be involved in our community climate action planning? Because the government's not coming to save us. That probably won't shock people in this room. And COP is a failure. So this is the greatest existential threat that humanity's ever faced, and the UN have declared Code Red for humanity. So we're taking care of the people and the planet into our own hands. We're not waiting and we're not asking for permission. We're just going to do. Because Insulate Britain were right, but I'm not going to glue my hands to the road. I'm going to go and insulate homes. So we've assembled a group of organisations that are part of our stakeholder mapping, from universities to higher education establishments to our county council, our district councillors who are supporting us in this activity. And Professor Tim O'Riordan, Chair of Norfolk Association of Local Councils, who came for a visit, and he's Professor Emeritus in Environmental Science at UEA. And he said there is real scope for Norfolk ALC to explore the lessons being learned by community climate action in forms of management, financing, recruitment, and widespread improvement of local livelihoods. And this should be connected to county-based devolution at an early stage. What an amazing testimonial in terms of scaling. So we've held a series of workshops. So we did the stakeholder mapping, then we did shared values, because it doesn't matter what political party you belong to, it's what values we share. So we all got to write up the values, and then we all got 3 votes, and the top values were sharing, belonging, wild space, community, and kindness. So we all agreed that's what we want. And we mapped out what community health and wellbeing feels like, and what it means to be in a resilient community that mitigates and adapts to the change that is here. And then we decided to work on themes for, what themes are we going to work on as a group, as a team, as a parish, as a village, as a community. And we decided out of a list we'd work on transport, energy, food, housing and biodiversity. And so we held project planning workshops in our parishes, and retrofitting was one of the key projects that came up, like energy audits of houses. So we know that in 550 homes in our 3 parishes, 84% are band D and below and probably need retrofitting. 40% of our CO2 is emitted by oil-fired central heating because we're off gas in a rural area. Everything's oil-fired. How do we get off that? How do we get off fossil fuels? And so we had about 5% of our community turn up, which is pretty good. You know, 5% is enough in terms of diffusion innovation curve to be the innovators before we get the early adopters, and then the early majority, and then the rest will follow. The late majority and the laggards will come. And not only that, what happened was we did this for 3 parishes. And when I came back to the pub, there was someone waiting for me from the neighbouring parish saying, I've heard about what you're doing, can we join? That's brilliant. So we've gone from 3 to 6 to 9 to 10. And this is the meetup of our Suffolk Green cluster that we've formed. And we've got active working groups on all of those 5 things. We're on a Community Energy South Pathways programme. We've founded Suffolk Community Energy Steering Group. And we're doing site identification and feasibility studies for renewable energy, and our aspiration is to create a smart energy microgrid for our villages and decarbonise and increase biodiversity along the way in the next 10 years. So thank you very much. That's Community Climate Action, and we've been funded to date a little bit from the National Lottery because they said it was replicable, scalable and leaves a legacy. So we've got a group started up in Bromsgrove, and we've spent the summer delivering community climate action planning workshops around the country. We've signed up 13 community groups around the country and 40 individuals that want to start something where they are. So come and see me if you want to start something where you are. Obviously this is happening, which is amazing already. Thank you very much. I'm Jewell.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Joolz. I'm Josh Neicho, and I'm a journalist by background and also work in communications. And my role in storytelling in the West Midlands, which I'm new to in the last 2 years as a Londoner, and honoured and excited to be here. It's storytelling in terms of media, but this does connect closely with stories on a much more interpersonal level. And we are working with communities and developing people as spokespeople, making content, as well as writing effectively press releases, being PRs for the climate. I'm just going to take you through a few stories of retrofitting which are aligned to or similar to the amazing work that Civic Square and Retrofit Balsall Heath have been doing before doing a summary of some of the stories about them over the past year. So Elizabeth, sorry, if we can go back one. Elizabeth, I searched out last autumn. She is resident of one of 2 houses which had a deep, what was called a tea cozy retrofit done by a company called BT Passive, involving putting a shell over the whole of both their houses. Elizabeth is a civil servant, and she describes with great enthusiasm the amazing difference that this has made in terms of the warmth of her house. You know, that it was a cold house before, even this time of year, end of summer coming into autumn, getting coughs and colds. The noise from the airport was, this is in East Birmingham, very close to the airport, very intrusive before, and the retrofit has really made a difference there. But also with bills, quite extraordinary, as this story says, really has been a 90% cut on what was there before. And she's very frank about the fact, there was disruption in terms of actually having the work done. But she says the challenge is 5%, the benefit is 95%. And thinking across the country, she says that I'd love the government to support this kind of project long term, because I know that the government's supporting people, but it's short term. And this theme of people and communities being empowered to get involved with and initiate these projects comes up time and again in these stories. Next slide, please. And this is her and her neighbours' houses in East Birmingham. Her neighbour too talks about having before the retrofit sort of snuggling under blankets in the living room and not needing to doing that afterwards. Really positive responses from the City Council and the architects and the academics who worked on this project, who John has also worked very closely with. Next slide, please. This lovely couple, the Greens in Dudley, are beneficiaries of Equans' Greener Homes, Greener Lives scheme. So this is council housing in Dudley, getting external wall insulation and a sort of refit of a new door and windows, and it's expanded the front of their property. Mr. Green had a stroke a year or so before the retrofit, and they fit the couple, when I went to interview them last year, really appreciated both the warmth that they could feel and the look of the house that they felt proud of, and anticipating lower bills. This was just as energy bills were zooming up last year. It'd be interesting to see what their experience has been over the last year. Next slide. I also did some work both in Stoke and in Birmingham, talking to people who were facing dire fuel poverty and all of the anxiety around that, and their openness to having energy efficiency improvements to their home. Mark, who was a former soldier, I thought put it very, very eloquently, saying if anything can be done to ease that burden, solar panel, heat pump, anything like that, that's what we should be doing. And he had the sense of the scale things need to be done. Instead of going to people, you should buy one, and you should buy one, and you should buy one, the government should go to companies and say you've got 20,000 houses. They're all fine to have heat pumps, and they can all have them. What are you going to do? So another vein of stories has been, and with all the interest in fuel poverty, about the sort of the appetite and openness to this. Next slide, please. And then some recent conversation, people at the opposite spectrum of society. Ben in Moseley has had a very complete retrofit of his home. He talks about really the resources that government needs to put behind this in recognition of the scale of the challenge, and the fact that people, for the majority of people, they're open to it. They'll say, I do my recycling, I'm worried about climate, but the financial possibilities need to be, that's going to be the driver for people. And on the right, Liam, receiving his awards, is the most sustainable installer of the year for this year, and he has done 3 of the top 10 heat pump installations on heatpumpmonitor.org. And he talks, he's a former plumber, got into heat pumps when he was working in New Zealand. He talks with great passion about what drives him is the technical challenge of, being able to design and install a system that will work really well for people. Final slide. And here's a montage of stories both about Balsall Heath and Ladywood. Hopefully some of the people and the headlines you might recognise. It's been wonderful doing this project. I've had this as a sort of a theme and a progressing story during my time working in the West Midlands. And I think I was just saying to Charlotte at the start of the session, what both CIVIC Square and Retrofit Balsall Heath have in common is this connection with people, and this identity. You see the energy companies, the likes of British Gas and E.ON, advertising that you can get a heat pump, come and talk to us. Come and tell us your stories. Some of the taglines you see. How much more compelling when it is people themselves becoming aware, organising and pushing for this. And we've got Dave in the audience today from Walsall, who's been doing incredible work with the community in his part of Inner Walsall. I've talked far too long, but look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Beautiful. So we've got about half hour left. Yeah. So I guess I'm just going to ask one question for all of us, I guess, and then I'll hand over to you guys in case you've got anything specific. Something that kept coming up with the different audiences that you reach, like you mentioned, PR, decision makers, residents, even Link Road. One of the reasons we chose that street was because of the mix of tenants, homeowners. There's an Airbnb, student accommodation. There's a range of people, and there's a role for everyone in the climate movement, is what we say a lot. So I'm curious on that front, particularly as storytellers. I'm wondering what are the opportunities that you've seen, like what's worked for you, and what might not be working that you've tried as well. And I'm going to go with you first, Bobby, and then we'll go back around.
Yeah, thank you. I think I think the opportunities and challenges that Retrofit present can be really interesting in how you can communicate to the media, and also like how the media might process that. Because like my job as a PR, I am still somewhat kind of slave to the news cycle. The news cycle is like, and media and journalists are kind of looking for those juicy news stories, those negative stories, those things that will get people irate and angry. And the kind of opportunities that Retrofit aren't that. I mean, you've brilliant presentations just then about the real positives, and it's great work that both you, Josh and Jewell, have like promoting and like communicating that so well and putting people first. Because as I say, like from the architecture world here, rarely do you see people in photography or mention press releases or what the emotions or feelings of that, say a building or a regenerative scheme or an insulation, a well-insulated new home can feel for you. And I think that bringing those emotions is a great opportunity to change the narrative around what I can do as a PR and like talk about the success stories. And I think there's also like great opportunities there, but we're still getting bogged down with challenges. I was doing some research earlier today on how Retrofit is communicated and represented in, say, on BBC News or The Guardian or The Times and Telegraph. And the first thing you see would be challenges. I saw an interesting article today in Construction News, which is like a trade publication about construction news. But the idea was like top 5 challenges to Retrofit. And the first one it said was like landlord approval. And I was like, okay, as someone who I don't think many people consider landlord approval to be a high priority for anyone, but it was just interesting that, I mean, it was probably quite a matter-of-fact article about how you get through this. And I think that overcoming that challenge, or certainly ignoring challenges such as landlord approval, is a great one. But again, it's cost, statistics, all these things that are kind of like normalized in kind of the way that a journalist would talk about a news cycle or issues like that. But again, when the opportunities of Retrofit aren't just about money, like, and also what's the challenge of doing nothing? What's the real cost to that? I think I've seen ranges of how much it would cost to retrofit the entire UK's homes, range from anywhere between 5 to 300 billion. I would say. The 5 was from the Construction Leadership Council, who are a group of property developers. The 300 billion was from Savills, who are a property development company. So they probably do see retrofit as quite a big challenge because it's going to cost them a lot of tax. So, but then again, think about, I wanted to again end on a bit more, think about the retrofit. Some of the most visited buildings in the world are retrofitted buildings. Tate Modern, British Museum, even the Louvre. These things are like hugely important to people, and this retrofit does provide an opportunity. So those are the kind of, that's the push and pull. But obviously I would say it has to be the opportunity first, and like smiling faces, people like that, presentation like that are an opportunity for me.
And I wonder if because there's a story in the old buildings. Yeah,
there's a story in the old buildings too. And when say residents come, community groups come to me as a freelance PR who know I'm sympathetic to their causes, who might be able to help them. You know, you might be able to get an article in local press or some larger trade press about what they're doing. But it's always like sometimes seen as a negative. You know, residents group block building of new homes. And it's a case of it's not as black and white as that. And obviously, like the heritage that you can preserve, that community groups have preserved. A 20th Century Society is a great example of an organization that was founded as a community group trying to save buildings. I think Euston train station was one of them. And that's it. But in the media, sometimes it can be portrayed as like, oh, these community groups are just blocking it for the sake of it. And, you know, the idea is like sometimes you have to get away with that and then talk about the opportunities and why people care about this, and, you know, the emotions around seeing the building or seeing a building demolished. I really feel like we should change the culture about demolition in the country and the world and see it as something to be ashamed of. There's a really fascinating book by Robert Bevan. It's called The Destruction of Memory, and it's about how demolition can be seen as something that can be tried in war crimes, and is seen as like involved as like a war crime everywhere from like Bosnia to Malawi and Timbuktu. But the idea is like just general demolition should be seen as a climate crime, I feel, when it's really unnecessary and really just for the sake of profit and adding asset to property value developers. So big challenge there. Yeah,
and that's a really relevant conversation with where we are in Moseley Road, Baths, which there's been fought for, you know, to be in this space. So.
Yeah, and sorry, just there's a great example up with me in Glasgow of Kinning Park Complex and Govan Hill Baths, very similar to this, where community groups sat there and occupied it and didn't leave and didn't let the demolition happen or the bulldozers come in and made a case for retrofit there. So yeah, I think like that kind of people-powered action can really create huge benefits.
Thank you. Jewell, do you want to go next? And also, I did pick up on when Bobby was talking about landlord approval. So if you want an invitation to share anything on that, then you have it.
Sure, but thank you. So yeah, what's worked, what hasn't? Well, our Community Benefit Society was set up to combat social isolation and loneliness, which only became more imperative post-pandemic, and people had got used to the concept of mutual aid and actually coming together. Our CBS also focuses on food, which brings people together, and environmental protection, education and conservation. So, you know, how do we bring people together? Where do we gather? What do we do? And after the pandemic, what we thought about was, who do I want to be with? Where do I want to be, and what do I want to be doing? Personally, I'm kind of considering what will the next 20 years of my life look like with those criteria. And certainly growing and digging is a really good way to connect, because you're much less likely to call someone a bitch on social media when you've just been digging potatoes with them. So leave your phone in the locker and, you know, and come together. And of course, a pub. What great way to talk to our neighbours and our farming community and our builders and everyone who comes in the pub and just chats over a pint. Have a conversation. That's a really good starting point. We've attended our parish council meetings. We're some of the only members of the public that do, to the point where they joke that we're on the parish council. And subsequently, I've joined a parish council, so I'm actually now a parish councillor. And if you told me that 2 years ago, I would have laughed. So that's generally working, and then talking to our schools. How do our young people engage with the environment and understand where food comes from and the story of food, and connect that, because you need your farmer 3 times a day, and you might need your lawyer, your dentist once a year if you're lucky. So having a story about food, I think we've all agreed that growing, cooking, and eating together is really important, and sharing in our community, and also just like have some fun, drinking, dancing, and cavorting. In the pub, it's got to be fun. It's not all been plain sailing. One of our parish councils narrowly voted to support our community climate action planning 3-2. And there were lots of objections about, I don't want to be the greenest village in Suffolk, talk to the Chinese embassy, this kind of thing. And my response to that was their bad behaviour doesn't excuse our bad behaviour. And, we outsource so much of our emissions to China. So, there are 2 sides to this coin. Number one is the United Nations have declared code red for humanity, and where we are is absolutely terrifying, with 1.5 degrees being reported as being unachievable now, and we're gonna pass through that, certainly in our lifetimes. That's a terrifying piece of news that can paralyse and stop anyone from acting. And 1.5 degrees is not a target; it's the safe upper limit for humanity. So we're going to pass through that. So that's one side of the coin. The second side of the coin is positive stories and positive action. And certainly that side of the coin is what inspires people to act. So really telling a positive story about how we can have claim agency as a community. We are stronger together, and if we act in concert, we can protect ourselves, we can insulate our homes, we can reduce our costs in the cost of living crisis while we're facing this poly crisis. We can ensure that we build resilient communities in future, and we can mitigate and adapt to the change that is here. And I'll finish on two things, perhaps. Number one is a quote from Sir James Bevan, who was the chief executive of the Environment Agency. And he said, "Climate change plus growth is an existential threat to our families, our happiness, our way of life, and all we hold dear." Now, we can choose to ignore that, or we can choose to do something about it. And I'm betting that you're all in this room because you think the second option is preferable to the first. And that's what resonates with me. That's why I'm acting now. And just for a bit of fun, shall I do a bit of fun? Yeah. So talking about landlord approval, in 2017 I did a talk at Green Gathering Festival on community land trusts to produce social housing in perpetuity. And at the end of that, I wrote a little poem, or a bit of spoken word, and it's from the perspective of the unreliable narrator, and it's called "Bring the Boys Round." So I'm your bloody landlord who's bought up all the rents, and you pay me all your wages, or you fucking live in tents. And you won't believe how easy it is for me to do, because I get all my money from tenants just like you. Because I've got all the contacts, gangsters by the score, and I'll just bring the boys round if you want a war. Because I'm your bloody landlord who makes up all the rules, and if you think your voice counts, you're a bunch of stupid fools. And if you want to make a fuss, I'll kick you out the door, because that's just the price you pay for being bloody poor. Because I've got all the contacts, filth who steal your rights, and I'll just bring the boys round if you want to fight. Because I'm your bloody landlord, and it's always been that way. I own all the homes you see and take up all your pay. And if you think it's just a scam, you're confusing me with someone who gives a damn, and that ain't me. Because I've got all the contacts, gangsters by the score. And if you haven't guessed yet, we're in the House of Lords.
Thank you. I loved how you said that the focus on like we all need to eat, so food, and so bringing in that humanity again, like those conversations in the pub around things that we all have in common. And you also mentioned that one of the challenges being that tension, holding that tension between reality, 1.5 degrees, and the positive. Like, we also have power, and both are true. Both can be true at the same time. And a little bit of trivia, but on the Good News of B16, you'll see a tightrope walker, and it was actually there is also a tightrope walker statue in Ladywood, where we're based. But also, it is about that tension of holding two truths to be true, many truths to be true. At the same time. I do want to ask you a little question as well about, you mentioned schools and getting young people involved. I'm curious, just a little bit more about that and how that's been going, because that is part of the, in terms of many entry points. They're the next generation. When we talk about long term, we're talking about, generations. So, a little bit about that, and then pass on to Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in a farm or farming community, if you're growing food, generally farmers plan 5 years ahead. So, if we're looking at leasing land, you're probably looking at a 20-year lease, and I'm going to be 70 then. My daughter will be my age. The kids that we're talking to now will be in their late 20s, and I wonder what the world will be like for them. And it's always difficult to balance those two sides of that coin when we're talking about climate to young children, not to terrify them. It's really, really difficult. But where we are, one of our parishes in our community climate action planning has the oldest demographic of anywhere in Suffolk. And it's, when we talk about rural regeneration, it's one of the challenges we face is all of our young people move away. No one can afford to live there. It's, a house is £500,000. How are you gonna get the start? So, the young people move away. They can't move back once they've had a young family. They can't look after their elders. And those that we do have living in our community are often living with their parents, so they're 20, 30 years old. But we've got a brilliant house band in our pub called Gorilla Glue. They're all young lads in their 20s and outside having a pint. I was telling them about the work that we're doing in our parish council. For instance, one of my roles is looking at what's called a rural exception site, which is a greenfield site where we have the opportunity to build some social housing in perpetuity funded by municipal borrowing. So that's borrowing, from Public Works Loan Board to build a regenerative settlement, net zero or carbon negative, off-grid, with some space, green space to grow, and that housing would be available to younger people in the village that need housing. So we've got housing needs, and they were kind of looking at me, going, "You what? Really? There might be an opportunity for me to have somewhere to live around here, really?" And I was like, "Yeah. Well, tell you what you should do is you should come and visit join in and come and attend a parish council meeting as a member of the audience." Because tell you what, politics is not a spectator sport; it's a participatory sport. So come and get stuck in, and that was a bit of a revelation for them, and they did actually get very excited about that. And so we do have a really good spread at iFarm in our CBS. Lots and lots of kids running around. Lots of people. We've even appointed a chap called Fergus who's neurodiverse and in his 20s to our management committee, and we go to lots of lengths to actually be inclusive and as diverse as we can, including young people. And the key thing about that is just making it fun, Yes, so that what a joy. I mean, to build a rural exception site and meet the housing needs of our local community and do it with bio-based materials. There's a beautiful stand at the back there from the architects group, loads of natural building products. And I guess in East Anglia, what we're really interested in again, is rural regeneration. So there's two things here. Also, we're talking about young people. Where's the economic activity? What jobs are they going to have? So we're doing hemp value chain meetups at Suffolk University Sustainability Institute with our farmers, the value chain, how do we process it, how do we grow it, how do we cultivate it. Personally, we grew 20 acres of hemp as a test, and that's a whole business in its own right. The materials and the supply chain for retrofitting is really important. The government's estimated at a 65 billion market opportunity just to meet their own legislative requirements by 2035. So where is this material going to come from? Well, we can grow it and we can sequester carbon into the soil at the same time. So that's jobs for our young people. We talked to West Suffolk College Green Skills team to talk to their construction group about training our young people to be able to go and retrofit these 480 odd homes. If we do 3 a month and turn over 1.3 million as a business, it will take us 13 years just to do our 550 homes in our villages, or 480 homes in our villages. So there's jobs for young people as well, you know. So that, you know, it's the rural regeneration. So it's housing, it's jobs, it's food, productive activity. And I'll just close off on one final thing in terms of systemic change, is that this economic activity is owned and operated by the community for the community. So it's via a community benefit society, so it's democratically controlled and community owned. So the surplus generated goes back to the benefit of the community and not to shareholder primacy and into rich people's pockets overseas for record profits. And that includes our energy and green infrastructure, that includes our housing, and that includes the productive activity of our labour when we actually go and, or our young people go and do these things. And in 5 or 10 years' time, they'll be running the company, and I'll have retired.
Thank you, and Josh, to you as well. So, multiple entry points, opportunities, and challenges that you've faced. Great.
What works and what doesn't. I'll talk mainly in terms of media. There's a fascination with the cost of living, with the energy crisis, with these stories, which can be, you know, stories of sort of misery and desperation, and of course of quite how bad things are. And I find I'm sort of approached proactively by broadcasters, for example, wanting to do this. And then there's the knack of trying to bring that around. Oh, sorry, here we go. To address those stories of fuel poverty with the solutions, and that can be a bit of a reach, particularly for a print article on the data on fuel bills or something. It's how do you make sure that you keep the solutions as part of the story. It's complicated to explain retrofitting in terms of communicating with communities, as many of you, I'm sure, will find daily. It's sort of, well, the word itself, you know, you need sort of synonyms or an explanation of talking about energy efficiency and warm homes and cozy homes and all of this in a way that's sort of meaningful without being patronising and accurate. And I think there's probably resistance from some involved in the sort of, you know, from campaigners and industry of, well, our heat pumps, for example, are, as things stand, are a very expensive piece of kit. So how do you make a heat pump story meaningful to a broad, you know, beyond simply the affluent? I think, again, the achievements of the two campaigns being at this festival has been this incredible, this can-do attitude, which is so refreshing. And Nigel as well in the audience, and the work that he's doing with getting the households in Acots Green and Tyseley as they were added to Balsall Heath as being eligible for Green Homes grants. So, you know, a slightly different bit of the city, but again, this sort of recognition of, you know, the immense challenges, but this is worth going for. And I think media has been interested. I mean, Bobby's saying, you know, this is something that may not get traction. I have, at least in this part of the world, found both print and broadcast journalists wanting to tell this story, which is, you know, really encouraging. Schools and young people and the generational aspect, I think it's really interesting, because you've got, for older people who, you know, there's the consideration of, well, how, if they get retrofitted property, how long is that, you know, they enjoy the fruits of that. Whereas for young people in many parts of the country, housing unaffordability means, you know, they're in a situation where it's going to be, you know, it's what the landlord's going to do. And then I think as well, there's just the comprehension of very young people of housing issues is sort of, you know, that's quite a gap to span. But there's obviously such sort of, I think anything with schools, whether it's sort of officially with schools or with sort of, young people autonomously, has such sort of power and is worth harnessing, perhaps with those bigger conversations about, holistic, sustainable communities. That again, Civic Square is so wonderful at starting. And finally, just on picking up on sort of Jewell's, is the balance of the light and shade and the grimness. I mean, I'm personally someone who the tragedy and apocalypse doesn't really work for me. I get overwhelmed, I get turned off, and I think for an awful lot of people that's probably their reaction. And I think with greener homes, that is such an opportunity to do. It's something that is at the core of life. It's so practical, and it's can do. I think that this particular subject has real power for spanning those sort of weaker souls like me.
Thanks very much. Let's see how much time we've got. Oh, okay, pretty much. I've got one question though. You mentioned, and I mean, I didn't have time to ask the audience, but it's quite a small plate. Like, we're all here. You can just come talk to us as people if you have questions. There's been a lot of talk here about like light and shade, and especially what you and Bobby have been saying about the media, like mainstream media wanting, you said juicy stories of desperation and misery, like these really, and I get it, when do you pick, when it comes to choosing those, do you choose the stories that you write about, or do you have agency there, or do you flip the coin? Do you still write meaningfully, but accurately? Like, do you have tactics there? Just curious, as a storyteller, just curious.
I mean, I'm here to see and support what's going on, and I hope also to be responsible in the people being willing to do things and having agency, and I hope I can be, as a good PR, fend off media that's being overly intrusive or wanting to do things that people are uncomfortable with. But I think that is tactically a point that anyone in housing and working in this area has to think about very seriously.
Thank you. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
So George Marshall talks about this, and he talks about don't talk about the climate, talk about fairness, because everyone gets fairness, just like it's either fair or not. Is it fair? Is that fair? And also he goes on to say a set of facts, no matter how well attested, will never change someone's mind. It will only just make them more entrenched in their position and probably cause cognitive dissonance, and you just end up with an argument. And it takes a good story to dislodge a better story to dislodge a story. And so those who tell the stories rule the world. And where we are is the hero's journey, and a great evil has beset the land, and a small group of people, and that's you or us in this room and our community, come together and restore the land to its beauty. And that's the hero's journey, and that's every good story. That's Star Wars, that's Lord of the Rings. But it does start with probably that headline that is quite attractive to a disaster headline, but has a happy ending.
It's also the story of Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, but that's my nerd drop there. It's a great series about that. But anyway, so that's the panel. We've got to the time right, haven't we? Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's really good.